A big welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me as we take a first peek at the second and final expansion for 1793 Patriots and Traitors. 1791, A New Dawn. This expansion is quite a bit different from 1793 and 1795, simply because it is a completely different period in the French Revolution. It is, in a sense, much more stable, well, at least initially. Expansions should be different from the base games. I hate it when expansions are just copies of the base game. It is robbery. In 1791, A New Dawn, I will be bringing you back to the less radical and more liberal phase of the revolution. Before the flight of the royal family, before the storming of the Tuileries in August 1792, and thus before the proclamation of the French Republic. The game starts right after the death of Mirabeau in April 1791 and ends in August 1792. There are in total 17 game rounds. Your objective, easy. Have the most influence in the legislative assembly, in the provinces, and the faubourg. But there's one single prerequisite to end the game. Elections to the Legislative Assembly have to take place. So as you can see at the start here, the game starts with the Assemblée Nationale. And before the game can end successfully, the Assemblée Législative must have opened. What is an immediate breath of relief is that there are no coalition armies on the France board at the start of the game. See, they are not there. France is currently at peace with Austria. Furthermore, as you will notice, there's not even a guillotine. Of course, the game can end prematurely before the 17th game round if the royal family managed to escape France, resulting in an immediate victory for the royalist player. Yes, the flight to Varennes can take place. 2. the coalition armies manage to get into the Paris province. Resulting in an immediate victory for the royalist player. Yes, war in Austria can be proclaimed. The Cordelier faction gains control of all the spaces in the Faubourg and in the Kaserne. This will result in an immediate victory for the Cordelier player. Yes, the people can finish the revolution. And finally, should the king's attempt to flee France fail, the French if the French monarchy is overthrown by force, this will result in an immediate victory for the Jacobin Cordelier player. Yes, the storming of the Tuileries can also happen. What in 1791 stands out from the other two games? What is different? First of all, from the very start, the areas that are full on the Paris board and in the provinces can be continually altered. This offers a lot of freedom of movement, but at the same time also ensures that your political influence remains uncertain. In other words, let's say that the Palais Égalité let's say the Palais Égalité or the Palais Royal in the 1791 game is completely filled. If I play a card for the cockades, so let's say I play military offensive for the cockades and I am the Feuillon. You can see there's no more room on the Palais Égalité. These can simply be, the influence can be replaced. So I played this one, and I'm gonna take this one away and that one away. Up, I can add these to it. There we go, and this one returns. There is an exception to this rule, and that's in the National Assembly area. At the start of this expansion, there is a historical setup. In the beginning, the Yellow Patriots have a majority in the National Assembly, followed by the Royalists and then the Jacobins. These influence will remain in the government and cannot be removed. The influence in the parliament always remains fixed. As you can see, there's an open space here. You can always add another influence there. There's only one, there's 6 places that remain fixed, and you can always place an extra one there. That is why it's important to have elections. Historically, National Constituent Assembly gave way to the Legislative Assembly on the 1st of October 1791. You will be doing the same in this expansion by activating the law Constitution of 1791. Once this law has passed, the majority must plan when in the future the elections will take place by placing the election marker on at least 2 months in the future. So say, for example, the Constitution of 1791 has passed, then the majority has to place the election marker somewhere in the future. Of course, from that moment on, you will see a rush upon the France board, because it's the France board that will decide who will sit in the Legislative Assembly. Once the month of elections has come, all the influence in the provinces are added to the bag. From here, 6 influence are blindly drawn. These then will form the new government, the Legislative Assembly. Believe me, the run-up to the elections is very, very exciting. So as you can see, in this example, the conservatives, Feuillon, have kicked political butt. Let's hope that does not happen in the real game. Speaking of politics, since France still has a monarchy, the parliament must attempt to rule together with Louis XVI. Historically, this absolutely did not go well. And this will obviously also be a source of concern in 1791 A New Dawn. The Royalist is an active player throughout the game. It represents King Louis XVI and therefore has control over the highly irritating veto coin. This is the veto coin. By making use of the veto coin, once per round, the Royalist can veto a law that has been passed. So say, for example, the Constitution of 1791 has passed, the royalists can say, no, this will not happen. So at that moment, the law is returned to the law deck. But it has its consequences. Each time that the royalist uses his veto coin, the Jacobin and the Cordelier receive 2 extra cubes from their stock to their pile. So the more Louis XVI becomes Monsieur Veto, the stronger the radicals become. Speaking of the radicals, in contrast to the royalists, the Cordelier faction, the Parisian masses are not an active faction in a 3 and 4 player game. Why? Because in the period 1789-1792, the uncouth masses barely had a voice in politics. As such, some areas on the Paris board will remain restricted to them. However, the Jacobins are active, and they need the support of the masses to put pressure on the king, the royalists, and the patriots. Once the player has a majority in the national convention or in the faubourg, the Cordelier NAF will become active. The Jacobin player will now also be allowed to play with the Cordelier faction. So they are teamed up, actually. What other benefits does the faubourg area offer? The masses will simply ignore any press restrictions imposed on them. If they have a majority in the faubourg, as is currently the case, the Jacobin and Cordelier factions can simply ignore the law of censorship. Of course, the conservatives have a number of options at their disposal to keep the unruly and mouthy Parisian masses in check. For example, the National Guard. One of the new areas on the board, as you can see, is the Hôtel de Ville. The Hôtel de Ville and the National Guard pawn are linked to each other. Whoever has a majority in the Hôtel de Ville has control over the National Guard. At the end of the round, the faction with a majority in the Hôtel de Ville is allowed to place the National Guard on an area of his choosing. And from there is allowed to send an influence to the conciergerie. Sure, the Cordeliers have no access to the Hôtel de Ville, but luckily the Jacobins do. So next to the Legislative Assembly and the Hotel de Ville tiles, there's also the Palais des Tuileries. Here's where the King Louis and Marie Antoinette reside. This tile is important because players need to constantly keep an eye on Louis in order to prevent him from escaping the capital. It also becomes important once the possibility of storming the Tuileries has been unlocked. As for the laws, let's see what extra laws there are. Interesting. There's the law of war with Austria, which makes the players able to start a war. And you might say, why would you want to start a war with Austria? Well, there are certain reasons for this. And what else do we have? We have oath of loyalty of the clergy. Supporters gain a gold coin, but they can only have a maximum of 6 cards in their possession for the remainder of the game. So at the start of 1791, all players can hold a maximum of 8 cards in their hand. But when oath of loyalty of the clergy passes, then only 6. And opponents place 1 permanent influence from their stock on the space on the Notre Dame area. And of course, the royalists also influence, it also strengthens the royalist influence in the provinces. As for the cards, there are a few beautiful ones also. Let's have a look at some of my favorites. Here's one of my favorite ones. Revolt in Saint-Domingue. I truly enjoy adding some less well-known history to my games. Few are aware that partly due to the revolution in France, the slaves in Saint-Domingue revolted against their masters in August 1791. Personally, I absolutely love the entire episode of what happened in this French colony between 1791 and 1804. I would love to make a game about it. In any case, when this card is drawn, the Royalist and Patriot player can have 1 less card in their possession for the remainder of the game, or alternatively must return 3 influence from their pile to their stock. What else is interesting? Here. Talleyrand. Of course he is present in the game, and of course he is very useful also. When played, Talleyrand offers the player both the cockade and the benefits of one of the following areas on the Paris board. Notre Dame, the Palais Royal, the Hotel de Ville, or he can neutralize the veto of the king, which is good to get some laws passed. Another one, Alexandre de la Mette. This LAC can be played by all factions. Have you noticed that there's no Feuillon faction and that there's no Girondin faction? Well, the Girondins will not be present in the game because at this time, Brissot, Roland, and Verginaud were actually members of the Jacobins. As for the Feuillants, well, they too were originally part of the Jacobin faction until after the massacre on the Champ de Mars in July 1791. In 1791, a new dawn, the Jacobin faction will automatically be split in 2, when Alexandre de la Mette is played. Everything is then divided between the Jacobin and the Feuillant here. Now, how does this happen? Well, I already see that I'm on 25 minutes, so this is something I will keep for a next video. Rest assured, it is awesome. There, that was a first peek at 1791 and Udon. Time to return to our own boring times now. Hope you enjoyed this video and see you next time. Vive la Révolution!